In reading 1, Defining Contested Concepts by Lynn Weaver, we will talk more about these various identities and how they are socially constructed. Race, social class, and sexuality are all social systems. They change over time and across cultures. They are not universal. They are persistent to preserve the privilege of social groups over others. So again, this is about power and access to scarce resources, which are wealth, power, and prestige. These categories have serious implications and consequences for social life. Often, the Western world, the US in particular, has a power-based zero-sum game, which benefits and provides options and resources for some by harming and restricting options and resources for others. The power is used to design or manipulate the rules. The power is used to win the game through force or competition. The power that winners have to name the game, to tell the story about the game, its significance, and why they won is why power and oppression matter. These categories and identities manifest differently in political, economic, and ideological institutions. However, let's first talk about what it means to be oppressed or what oppression is. Oppression exists when one group has historically gained power and control over valued assets of society, such as wealth, information, and political power, by exploiting the labor and lives of other groups, and then by using those assets to secure its position of power into the future. Exploitation is a power relationship resulting from the reinforcing of the unequal distribution of productive assets in society. The unequal distribution of society's valued opportunities and resources is repeatedly reinforced in daily life, and its fundamental unfairness is masked in the pervasive belief systems and ideology, or otherwise known as a set of stereotypes that interprets the inequalities as natural outcomes of each group's presumed superior or inferior traits. These definitions tend to reify the categories, to make them seem universal, seem tied to a presumably stable biology, rigid and unchanging reality. Every social situation is affected by society's wide historical patterns of race, class, gender, and sexuality that are not necessarily apparent to the participants and that are experienced differently depending on the race, class, gender, and sexuality of the people involved. And that is why we're taking an intersectional perspective in this course. Often we are unaware of how these categories and structures function in society. That makes it easy for it to be pervasive, leading to systemic inequalities. Systemic patterns of inequality can also be obscured by those disadvantaged by them because they lack access to information and resources that dominant groups control. People often come away from a discriminatory practice not knowing whether or how the discrimination took place, even when they are victims of the injustice.
When an individual takes their privilege and uses for the benefit of others, this is called being an ally or accomplice. Some examples of allies and more so accomplices are anti-racist, anti-sexist individuals and organizations. They're able to reveal their privileged positions and seek to transform them from an identity of social superiority to one of social responsibility. However, many people are not aware of their privilege or how they benefit from it. Because members of privileged groups are not disadvantaged and in fact benefit from these systems, people in these groups find dismissing the claims of oppressed groups as unreal relatively easy. Those who have benefited from the current arrangements have difficulty seeing the ways in which the exclusion of others has made their inclusion in the successful mainstream and status quo possible. One of the ideologies that we hold in the United States is meritocracy, which is based upon class inequality. Economic positions in the United States are presumed to be earned in a free and open meritocratic society in which hard work and talent pay off. This is an example of the American dream. The ideology of meritocracy is able to demonstrate those differences and hard work and talent, not oppression, that are offered as the core causes of the obvious extreme economic differences present in the population. Socialization is what you know and how you get to know it. But have you ever asked yourself why you don't know something? Well, we have various institutions or agents of socialization such as media, education, religion, parents, and your peers. Let's focus on the media. In our education and mass media, we do not systematically learn about the totality of the experiences of subordinate groups. Often their experiences, their perspectives are left out of our educational systems and the representations. Groups experience high death rates from lack of access to medical care, high infant mortality rates, increasingly high school dropout rates, declining college, graduate, and professional school attendance rates, high employment and poverty rates, and declining standardized test scores. Something is wrong with the atmosphere, not with the canary. So we must pay attention to how marginalized and oppressed groups are experiencing the structures and institutions in our society. It's not that they are doing something wrong or this is a natural cause, but rather how the systems are set in place. Sometimes examples of people like Oprah Winfrey and other high status celebrities are used as to explain why they made it and why can't other marginalized oppressed groups make it. These are outliers, and often these stories to justify the marginalization and oppression of others are simply outliers of rags to riches stories. These systems of inequality are never perfectly patterned. Some people have experiences that defy the overall pattern. Rags to riches stories are more complex than we are often led to believe. Because of the pervasive, persistent, and severe nature of oppressive systems, people resist subordination, and in their resistance can develop positive skills, talents, and abilities. These skills fortify them to survive and to challenge more effectively the very system designed to limit their opportunities to use their talents, skills, and abilities. Resistance in individual and collective forms pressures the dominant system to change and transform over time. Society at the micro level of the individual and family. Oppressed groups have created their own institutions to resist the dominant culture's organization and to produce a different social order. Resistance also occurs at the micro level of the individual and the family, when individuals develop an alternative consciousness, insist on self-definition and self-valuation, and refuse to incorporate negative images of their groups. An alternative consciousness is often nurtured in community resistance. An alternative consciousness is often nurtured in a community of resistance. Empowerment is a process aimed at consolidating, maintaining, or changing the nature and distribution of power in particular social context. Processes of oppression and resistance and empowerment exist in dynamic relation to one another. Each is in continuous process of changing to adapt to the shifts of the other. Social institutions are intertwined with one another. For example, the ideological domains such as the media, arts, religion, and education institutions have the primary purpose of being ideological, which means they are producing and distributing ideas and knowledge about society and its people, why society is organized the way it is, and also ideological institutions enable dominant groups to know in order to function in society. Control over ideological institutions enables dominant groups to share public images and cultural beliefs about both the dominant group and subordinate groups. They are essentially controlling images. The political domain is the government, law, civil and criminal justice, the police, and the military, which represent institutions whose primary purpose is political. This means they create and enforce the laws and government structures that define citizens and non-citizens' rights, responsibilities, and privileges. Through control over these institutions, dominant groups exert control over the behaviors of others. Dominant groups structure the polity so that the state supports and enforces the exploitative relations. The economic domain is the major industries such as finance, healthcare, manufacturing, housing, transportation, and communication. And these work to represent institutions whose primary emphasis is economic, producing and distributing society's valued goods and services. Control over material goods and resources such as wealth, jobs, wages, and benefits, healthcare, daycare, and education makes dominant groups more competitive in the workplace and in community life. The dominant group structures the economy so that the exploitative relations continue, so that the poverty and labor of the exploited enhances the welfare of the exploiters. Pervasive power of dominant ideologies are used to convince subordinate group members that the current social hierarchies are acceptable and cannot be changed. A tool often used is controlling images. Self-negations refer to how subordinate groups sometimes restrict their own lives because they believe the negative views and limits imposed on their group members internalize oppression. They do not challenge the social order and may even exhibit self-destructive patterns. Subordinate group members sometimes restrict the lives of other members of oppressed groups or of their own group because they believe the negative views and limits imposed on other subordinate groups or on their own.